Why do young men leave the church? A lot of people are going to say, what about the young ladies? What about the women? Well, we'll talk a little bit about them, but we're focusing today on why do young men leave the church. This has been noted by people who are just attending Mass, but it's also noted in research and the Pew research. And I'm joined today with the great Eric Sammons, who's done so many great videos and interviews on topics related to this. Eric, how many children you have, Eric?
I have 7.
Father of 7. I've learned a lot from him, a lot of great insights. So welcome back, Eric. We're going to talk about this article you wrote, No Church for Young Men, over at Crisis. So just a reminder, everybody, Eric is the author of The Old Evangelization, an excellent book. I highly recommend it. There's a lot of hype about the new evangelization, but the old evangelization worked pretty well for a long time. So before we get started in this, I just want to remind everybody to please like the video, please subscribe, please share it using the share button. And we'll begin, as we normally do, with our prayer, and we'll pray the Our Father in Latin, the Pater Noster. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Pater Noster, qui es in caeli, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimitte nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris, et Filii, et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, Eric Sammons. Doing well, still keeping the beard.
Yes, still keeping it short like
good.
you.
Yeah.
So, thanks, you too.
Yeah, I just keep knocking it down. Joy's decided she likes it. Sometimes she likes it a little longer, but I think she generally likes it when I keep it shorter.
Yeah, same with my wife.
Yeah. So there it is. All right. Young men. You know, you go to a daily Mass, you'd be fortunate if you spotted one man under 25 there.
That's right.
So, you know, this is, I think, something that's more peculiar to Christianity. Islam, I've read, has a higher male participation than female. So mosque attendance is majority male, minority female. And then I believe the Eastern Orthodox have more male attendance than we do.
Yes, they do. Eastern Orthodox do a better job of keeping men than Catholics or Protestants do.
Yeah. So let's go through some of these numbers that you marked out in your article. Why is it that Catholic young men leave the church? And you've quoted a recent Pew Study. Do you have those numbers in front of you, or do you want me to read them?
I do.
Okay.
And so first we should just take one step back and just state that, of course, every demographic's leaving the church, unfortunately, sadly. And so the question becomes, okay, what can we do about that? And of course, that's what the new evangelization was supposed to do, and what so many efforts in the church are supposed to do is, why are so many people leaving the church? But I think what happens often is these efforts have to be politically correct, and therefore they can't say certain things or do certain things. So, for example, just the idea of this video, of my article, that perhaps there are different ways that you would reach men than you would women, is anathema. And so what you do is you handicap yourself, and you make it much harder to do what you say you're trying to do, which is to bring everybody back to the church. You have to recognize that what might be attractive to, let's say, a 70-year-old woman may not be attractive to a 25-year-old young father. And so that's the first thing. But what's interesting is that, first of all, the most important thing is we try to keep people in the church early, and that's through youth ministry. That's the model that the church uses now, is youth ministry. That's very much modeled on Protestant youth ministry. Right. Were you involved in your Protestant church's youth group growing up? Because I
was very involved in our Protestant youth ministry. And, you know, I think a lot of Catholics who haven't grown up with that model, I mean, we had dances, and we had lock-ins, and we had, you know, even just after youth ministry, everybody going over to Sonic, to get an ice cream cone. And there was all this fellowship that was built into it. And, looking back, probably when I was, 30, I would have thought that's dumb. But looking back now that I have, teenagers of my own, I realize that social element. I mean, this, Eric. Our kids were like uber Catholic dads.
Right.
And they're like, well, not all dads are like that. Not all families are like that. Is my family weird? So sometimes just meeting other young people who come from strong Catholics, I think, is just sort of reassuring.
Right. They're not the only one. I mean, I was at the March for Life last week, and that was just great for the young people to see all these other people who are unified, at least on this issue, which is great. But yeah, and I was the youth leader my senior year of high school of my youth group, very involved in it, and a lot of great things, like you said. In fact, it was through my youth group that I made a commitment to Christ. As we would have said back then, I gave my life to Christ, accepting my personal Lord and Savior, and that was a real grace-filled event. I have a different view of it now, of course, than I did back then, but I do think it helped me on the path to Christ, and so. That's the model that the Catholic Church has adopted, that you have these, and just to be clear at the beginning, like my son who's in high school, I have one child right now in high school, he's part of a youth group, and I'm not saying youth groups are bad. However, I do think there's some fundamental flaws in how the church looks at what quote unquote youth ministry.
Yes.
And the number one, this will eventually get us to the whole point of this video, which is about the young men. The number one flaw, I believe, is the separation, too much separation between the youth and their parents.
Yes.
Because, and this is where we get to the Pew Study.
And let me add one thing here.
Sure.
So much so that even in Protestantism and in certain Catholic circles, the youth have their own service or their own mass. Right. Usually a life teen thing. This is a grave abuse. It's very bad.
Right. A lot of times you'll have a Sunday evening mass at a parish. It's the youth mass, and it just has hip and cool music or whatever, which often isn't hip or cool even for young people. But it's completely separate and done. And the whole idea is it panders to teenagers, which, if there's one thing I know about teenagers, having had 4 of them now, is they hate people pandering to them. They don't want to be treated as some alien life form by adults. They want to be treated as young adults, which is actually what they are. In fact, this is a whole tangent we won't go down, but I would say the whole teenage thing is a problem. Really, they're young adults, and they should be treated like that, not like some different species. But what studies have shown, a Pew Study, but other studies have shown that the number one determiner of whether or not a child will grow up and keep the religion he grows up in is if his parents practice it, and how much his parents practice it. And so even if your kid, and whether or not they go youth group has nothing to do with that, really. Has very little to do with that, I should say. Right. And so, for example, if a child grows up with 2 Catholic parents, there's 60% chance they will be Catholic when they are an adult. They will remain Catholic. But if, and by the way, if you have only 1 Catholic and 1 non-Catholic parent, then it's only 30% will remain Catholic. So right there, you see the huge difference between having 2 Catholic parents and having only 1 Catholic parent, which is a sign, by the way, parents to really encourage your kids to only marry Catholics, don't marry non-Catholics. But so you see that huge drop there. But even from that 60%, if the faith of the parent, if faith is very important to the parents, like they practice it a lot, then it bumps up to 73% remain Catholic. So we see, whereas if it's not important, even if they have 2 parents are Catholic and it's not important to them, it's down to 38%. The point of this is, if a kid has 2 parents who consider their faith, or has 2 parents who are both Catholic and they consider it important, they're far, far more likely to remain Catholic than any other situation. And that has nothing to do with youth group. Because why? Because kids end up like their parents, whether we like it or not. Sometimes that's a terrifying thing as parents, as you know. It can be terrifying, but they end up like their parents more times than not. And so that's why when the church says, okay, we need to keep young people in the church, we need to, so we do all these things to keep them in the church, but it's all directed towards youth ministry. The focus, I would say, is flawed.
Yep.
It should be on the parents, particularly parents of young children. So we're talking parents in their 20s and 30s, particularly, which a lot of times parishes and dioceses will call that young adult ministry, and they act
annoying.
And it's
29-year-olds are not young adults.
Right.
It's all over the place, though.
I was in a diocese where young adult ministry was up to 39. When you're 39. You have had a job for a long time. You probably have a mortgage. You got, a number of kids, for most people. That's not young adult anymore. You're as adult as anybody else.
Yeah, that makes us mid-adults, man. We're not mid-adults.
Right, exactly. I remember I turned 40 when I was in this diocese, and I said, well, am I not allowed to come in? Am I not young anymore? And the guy was joking, like, no, you can still come, but you're not young anymore.
Yeah.
I wasn't at 39 either.
Right, exactly. Another thing that's a problem with the youth group is it creates a mentality. Again, I think youth groups are good for fellowship and creating a place for Catholic young people to meet one another. And, oh, wow, I'm not the only one who wears a scapular, or I'm not the only one where my parents say, have you been to confession this month? These kind of things. Right. But, like when I was in youth group, that's where we were taught, don't have sex before marriage. Don't do drugs. Don't look at pornography. It'll ruin your life. What else were we taught? Oh, we were taught in youth group, don't go into debt. That's a message that a 18-year-old needs to hear.
Yeah, I'm impressed with your youth group leaders.
Yeah, my youth group was legit. It's probably, nice. It wasn't Catholic. This is Protestantism, but they were serious, and they wanted us. They were basically teaching us the book of Proverbs. You read Proverbs, which is written for young men, and it's avoid the promiscuous, slutty woman, the harlot. Right. Don't go into debt. Don't go into surety. Love wisdom, pursue righteousness, all these things. So I think, it can also read the Bible every day. We were taught that. We were taught, get this, folks, we were taught the Antichrist is coming soon. He's going to ban all Bibles. You won't be able to have a Bible. So you got to read it now while you got it. And you should memorize it. That way you have at least a few verses with you when the Bibles are banned. That's what we're taught.
That's a little crazy.
Hey, but you know what? I read the Bible from Genesis to Apocalypse that year.
Hey, nice.
I read it from table of contents to maps because the Antichrist was coming, and I'm glad I did. I was a 16-year-old. But part of the problem is it tells the parents, this isn't my job. Right. They go to youth group twice a week or once a week, or they go to Catholic camp, and it's taken care of. I don't have to sit down with my son and say, pornography is a grave evil that will ruin your life.
Right.
Or if you get promiscuous and, have many partners, it's going to negatively affect your future marriage. So parents kind of feel like, oh, that's going on at youth group. My job is done here.
And really, that is the key point. And good youth ministers today will tell you this all the time, that they're fighting basically against the parents. Mm-hmm. If you tell them, let's just use the example, don't go into debt. If the youth minister says that and has a lesson on that, but the parents are deeply in debt, they're spending all this money on a too big house, too nice a car, all this stuff. And they're when their kid gets ready for college, they're saying, oh, yeah, go and get $100,000 debt to get your sociology degree. Then what is the kid going to do? Almost 9 times out of 10, he's going to end up like his parents in deep debt. And the same thing if dad's watching pornography even on the side and the kid maybe doesn't know about it, but he obviously is not strongly against it, well, the son's going to end up doing the same thing. If dad's not saying to him, especially this is dad to a son here, if the dad is not saying to the son on a regular basis the importance of staying away from, obviously I'm talking about when the kid's old enough to actually be on the internet, not when they're young enough and they shouldn't even be on, but teach them the importance of modesty, keeping tabs of what you watch, and going to confession often. I don't care what the youth minister says, that kid's probably not going to do it. And that is the whole point of my article, is that the focus has to change from all this energy towards the kids, towards all the energy to the young parents. And then we get to the second point, which is, okay, we want to address young parents. So parents who are maybe 29 years old and they have a little, maybe 2 little kids or something like that. And they're like, okay, they have nothing at most parishes that attracts them. And in most cases, the man, particularly the father, particularly, is not attracted. And here's where the study that I think is the most shocking. It was a study that's not real well known. It was actually done back in 1994, published in 2000. It was showing the difference between if a mother versus a father practiced, what is the difference in the kids? Because we already said if the parents don't practice, the kids aren't going to practice. But what if the mother practices and the father doesn't, and vice versa?
Yes, this is interesting.
Yeah, essentially, if the father doesn't practice, the kids are highly unlikely to practice no matter what the mother does. Which I know there are mothers out there watching this right now who are faithful and leading a faithful life, and their husband's not, and they're worried about their kids. And I would just say, keep doing what you're doing, pray for your husband. Right. And it's not to diminish the heroic nature of your Calling.
Yeah, and we believe in grace, not stats.
Right.
There is the Saint Monica feature within the Catholic Church. We're just looking at, commonalities that have been noticed, and that is when kids leave the home, they look to their dad to what it means to be out into the world.
Right. And so, because the church, when it's deciding how do we go about on a macro scale, on a big scale, how do we reach people? Yeah, then you do look at these surveys to see what works, what doesn't. It's not to say there aren't cases where because God can do whatever he wants. So yes. But the fact is if that the father is non-practicing and the mother is practicing regularly, only 2% of the children become regular worshipers, and then another 39% will attend irregularly. So they are somewhat, but they're not, it's irregular. By the way, this is not Catholic only. This is just any Christian denomination in this. The point, though, is that fathers are what matters. So if we want to reach the kids, if that's the ultimate goal, is we want these kids to grow up and be Catholic, what parishes should be doing is not directing all their resources directly towards the kids, but instead directing them at young fathers, fathers of kids who are toddlers and young, teenagers and all that whole range. And so we're talking about men between the ages of maybe 25 and 40, most commonly, and even into the 40s.
Eric, I'd like to back that up to maybe 20.
Well, yeah, I mean,
because a lot of faithful traditional Catholic men, I'm noticing, if you're in a traditional Latin Mass community, they preach against fornication. You can't have sex before marriage. That's the Bible. That's the Catholic teaching. Right. So you are seeing, faithful Catholic men who are getting married like I did at age 23, 22, right. And they're not contracepting. So they're having kids by 23, 24. And, really they need to be mentored and understand. A lot of these guys too are coming out of heathenry.
Right. And really it is. And I think that's a good trend, by the way, earlier marriage, because I think we put off marriage for all these dumb reasons, mostly financial, which are just not the most important thing. And it leads to, like you said, fornication, pornography, all those things. It can help foster. But the point is that basically once young men get out of the house, so 18, maybe if they live a couple extra years at home, and they make decisions on how am I going to live, that's when we're losing them. And so the question, and therefore, because we're losing them, we lose their kids.
Right.
And so the question becomes, why are we losing particularly young men? And in fact, not only young men, we're losing young women at that age too. But I would argue that many of the things that we do in the church today turn off men. And if we change that so that it didn't turn off men, we would not turn away women. Because there are certain things both men and women are attracted to, and there are certain things that only women are attracted to and men are very turned off by. And so that's why in the article I'm giving suggestions. Okay, what is it about the Catholic Church, Catholic parishes that turn men off? And the line that got so much controversy and people did not like when I said that the primary thing that needs to be done to destroy the current ambience found in most parishes, which is only attractive to gay men in the 1970s.
Elton John effect.
Yeah, merely entering a typical suburban Catholic parish is emasculating, from the architecture to the music to the felt banners to the limp homily to the army of elderly female Eucharistic ministers. What red-blooded male would be interested in that if he did not already have a faith strong enough to see beyond it to the underlying reality? And I think that's something people who go to Mass every week, faithful Catholics, they don't recognize, they can't see outside of it. They can't take a step back.
They've been going to that Mass probably for 15 years. Everything has become invisible. It's like when you're in your own kitchen, you don't notice the chip tile on the backsplash, and you don't notice the stain on the wood, and these things just disappear to you, right? But when a 22-year-old walks in there for the first time, he gets the Heebie Jeebies.
Yeah. And that's why, on the flip side, why you hear so many stories of Catholics who have done that, who grow up in those parishes and live in those parishes, when they go to their first traditional Latin Mass parish, they're shocked.
Yeah.
Because all the things that they stopped noticing are now thrown to the fore because they're all missing at the traditional Latin Mass parish. I'm talking about the parish that has its own church and can decorate however they want and do whatever they want with it. And that's why it's so shocking, because they have just grown accustomed to it. And things like the army of women who come up as the extraordinary ministers, the felt banners, the just kind of the music, which is just so, it's like, people will kind of say it's like Simon and Garfunkel. That's insulting Simon and Garfunkel. It's not even that good. And it's just it's so effeminate. So in the way of just not virtuous, not masculine, not brave, and all those different adjectives you can use, it just misses all of that. And people who have been going there for 15 years and they're doing their darndest as a youth minister, for example, don't realize all the subconscious signals that are being sent. Men go away, men go away.
Yeah.
And so what happens is the men go away. And when they go away, maybe their wife still the wife who's not as naturally turned off by these signals, she continues to go, and so she brings her kids, but her kids end up falling away because the dad fell away.
Yeah.
And it's a tragedy. And I know I saw, when I said this, a number of women, Catholic women, good Catholic women, were like, those men just need to man up. I'm going still. Well, that's not, I thought the whole point is evangelization. We're trying to attract people, aren't we? Yeah. We understand that the human element impacts the divine. Mm-hmm. In fact, I specifically say that only men who already have a faith strong enough to see beyond the underlying reality are the ones who are going. But we don't want to just attract those men. We want to attract the men who they have some connection, they have some desire for deeper things. But their desire for deeper things, when they walk into a typical suburban Catholic parish, it's rejected, because this isn't deeper things. Felt banners isn't deeper things. But if they walk into, let's use the example of the Eastern Orthodox parish, that attracts men better. And they see I see the icons behind me, all these icons. They see this very beautiful and yet masculine liturgy.
I was listening to some Eastern Orthodox chants the other night, and in my library, and Joy came in. She's like, "What is this, Lord of the Rings? What is this?" I said, "No, this is Byzantine chant." Oh, okay.
Yeah, and you hear Marty Hagen songs when you go to the Catholic parish, which is to make any red-blooded male run for the door. Yeah, and it's like trying to act like these things don't matter. You're just going against human nature. God made us this way. God made men different from women.
Well, let's say something here. There are certain kinds of men who are attracted to the Marty Hagen.
Yes.
They're called Jesuits. They love this stuff.
Yeah, and the problem is that, and this is just
jazz hands.
Yeah, being frank, a lot of priests give off a very emasculating image as well. That is not attractive. A man is not attracted to that and say, "This is a guy I want to go hang out and have a beer with." And so that is a problem as well. And that's why you love seeing these young priests who come in who are so masculine and are great. I mean, there's such a breath of fresh air. But so the point is, if here's the logic.
And by the way, we're not saying like this is Arnold Schwarzenegger and a chasuble. That's not what we're talking about. The guy doesn't even, he doesn't have to come off as Clint Eastwood in the pulpit. We're just talking about a man who is confident, not soft, has a certain rigor to himself. I think that's, there's a willingness to sacrifice within strength. And that's basically what masculinity is. That's who Christ is as our Redeemer. He is strong, but he's willing to sacrifice to save others. And that right there is what we're looking for, not the softness who, bends the neck every time the 8 matriarchs of the church say, no, we're not doing that.
Right.
And then he's like, okay.
And that's a great point, because that's another criticism is when we start talking about masculinity, there is a truly actually toxic form of masculinity out there. That's not a Catholic one. But what's happened is that the feminists have called every form of masculinity toxic.
Yeah.
Just being a man is now toxic. And that's infected the church in a great manner. And you see that. And I think the great example is the pastor who allows a couple old ladies to run the parish, and everything they want, they get. Susan from the parish council.
Right.
That's what happens, and that's not masculine. The priest doesn't have to go hunt or anything. He just needs to be a man.
Yeah.
And it should be something that would be in common sense. 50, 100 years ago, isn't so common anymore.
He needs to be able to tell Susan of the parish council, no, we're not doing that. Sit down. It's over.
Yeah, and it's like, and usually Susan's in charge of the music, and that's where
the children's ministry,
and the
youth group, and the young adults, and the architecture committee, and the liturgy committee.
And so you think about,
and Father just kind of shows up like a puppet.
And so
what I've noticed, Eric? I want to say this. This might get me in trouble, but I want to say it. I've noticed that when it comes to weak men, they don't have to be effeminate, and loving Elton John and with a lisp, but they don't have to have those caricatures. But when it comes to weak men and effeminate men and gay men, I have noticed a common denominator, and that is they have an obsession with the matriarchs. They love matriarchs, and my thesis on this, I might be wrong, is they only can see women as strong mothers, which places them into the role of dutiful son. And I think this, if look around, people, you might start noticing this, but when you put that into a parish context, it's disastrous. It results in what we just described, is a dutiful son looking for leadership from the strong matriarch mommy type. And this is kind of like the mold of the post-Vatican II church now.
Right.
And it happens in marriage too, where you have a weak man and the wife takes on the role of strong matriarch mommy, and the husband actually becomes one of the kids.
Right.
And is always looking to her for leadership, what we're going to do next, what's the next vacation, all of these things, what needs to be done around the house. She is the matriarch mommy and he's the loyal son. That is just arrested development. That is just a man who never crossed the threshold into what it means to be an adult male.
Yeah, and solid psychological studies have shown that the vast majority of gay men, a lot of the cause of it is that mother-son, and then the father-son relationship. Right. I mean, they've even shown where the mother who won't allow the father to wrestle with the son and is like, not saying that causes homosexuality, don't get me wrong, but it's a sign, it's a symptom of something is wrong with the relationships, and it can cause the son to then have a skewed view of masculinity, of femininity, of reality, really. And of course, it can be much more extreme when you have an abusive father situation and things like that, which is often a cause. But even beyond that, I think you're right. I think what happens is we just had this skewed view of reality, of the matriarchy, of the strong matriarchy. And we have to remember, as politically incorrect as it is to say, the Catholic faith is patriarchal.
Yes.
God is a patriarchy. God the Father. It's not God the Mother. It's God the Father who is the source of all things. And the patriarchy, we have a pope who can only be a man. We have bishops who can only be men. We have priests who can only be men. That is not an accidental. It's not an accident of history. That is a built-in feature of the Catholic Church. And that's attractive then if it's lived out. That is, and it has, as it had been for so long, that then becomes attractive to young men who become priests or become fathers who pass on the faith to their children. And then there was no need even for a youth ministry as much, because you had the parents led by the father passing on the faith to their kids. And so when you have all these signs and symbols in the church, in parishes that say no men allowed or no men welcome, then you have your typical 30-year-old man who's well developed. Let's say, we're not talking about somebody who's got issues. He's got a couple kids, but he's not well formed in the faith, because that's a lot of people. He just doesn't really get it. But I'm willing to bet that if his parish were not so against masculinity, he'd be willing to go with his wife to mass, and that would then develop his faith, and he would then pass it on to his kids. But like we said, so many things turn him away that I think it's sad that these men who are good men, but they just haven't been brought up themselves, they're just turned off because they see the externals, they don't know the internals. Yes, it's a valid mass. Yes, it's the blessed sacrament. It's the body, blood, soul, and divinity, all those things. But when it's clown mass time or felt banners and terrible music, the average person can't see beyond that. He can't see the realities underneath. That's why we have all the externals, is to help people see them.
To communicate the reality.
Right, exactly. I mean, there's a reason the Catholic Church has always directed towards these beautiful externals. Yes, you could have, in a wartime, you could have a priest say mass on the hood of a Jeep. Yeah, and that's beautiful. Right. But that's the whole point is when you don't have one of those situations, you add all these externals to help people see the internals. And when the externals are very effeminate, then the men just walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you think about, okay, so, most men aren't like into art, right? They're not going to, who's your favorite painter? But when you talk about an aesthetic, you'll see that whether it's film, especially in film, the films that do best amongst a male demographic are usually wartime films.
Right.
Like I haven't seen it yet, but the new film 1917, I heard it's excellent. Have you seen it?
So did I. No, I haven't, but I heard the same thing.
But what you see in these films, you see regiments, you see marching, you see order, you see uniforms, you see generals, you see sacrifice,
right?
You see courage, strength, barking orders, following orders. All of these things are going on, and you go to a Latin mass, that kind of is going on as well. Right. You have a very, you're walking and turning at right angles. There is much practice and memorization of formulas and movements. Everything is designed to express this divine order. And, it feels militaristic. People even said that.
And that brings up a story that I've told before, I think, I may not hear, but I remember when I was, I guess this was a few years ago when my kids were younger, I remember I saw two different signs on the same day. I was at a baseball tournament, and there was a sign on there trying to get people to join this travel baseball team and youth baseball team. And it was talking about hey, this is a real commitment. You better love baseball, better be willing to sacrifice, and, because we're going to be a real team that's going to try to compete and try to win.
Right.
And that's very attractive to these young men. They're like, yes, that's what I want. I then went to mass. It was at on a baseball tournament. So it was at a visiting parish, and they had a sign for they wanted altar servers. It was like, boys or girls, not much commitment. You don't really need to do very much. It's really like they were begging people to join because they had no servers, and it was like, just come as you are type of thing. You don't have to learn hardly anything. And I know the mentality of the person making that second poster, it was, we're desperate for people. We need to make this look as easy as possible. But what that person did not realize is you're literally doing the opposite. Yeah. You are making it less attractive. The baseball coach understood how to attract these young men to come play by asking for commitment and sacrifice and things like that. But the altar server person in charge did not. But that's what you see in a parish, a lot of parishes, is there's no call for sacrifice. There's no call for living for something greater. It's all a matter of like, oh, please come on Sunday, and we won't ask anything of you. We'll make sure our homily is less than 6 minutes, and it has no calls for anything controversial. Yeah. Zero substance. We'll just tell you to be nice, because we don't want to offend anybody, because if we offend somebody, they might leave, and we're desperate for people to come.
Right. Which is a very female way of looking at reality.
Right.
My wife is the youngest of 3 daughters, and we have 4 sons and 4 daughters. And she is often perplexed and confused by the way the boys interact with one another and the way I interact with the boys.
Right.
Often thinking that something is mean or hurtful. Yeah. Right. But I've had to repeatedly explain to her that there is this whole dynamic of who's the alpha, especially amongst the boys, the 4 boys, right? And it's not necessarily malice. It's just figuring out the hierarchy. And people get shoved and pushed, and that's not toxic masculine or whatever. No. It's just like little tigers at the zoo playing with each other and pushing each other and nipping at each other and biting each other a little bit. And it's all part of the game and part of the play. And when you're around men and they're playing, baseball or soccer, there's a little bit of trash talk. I don't think that's immoral, right? That's just part of the game. It's part of creating a social hierarchy and a dynamic. And honestly, it brings a little bit of fellowship and unity amongst the group. And so, for my wife, who didn't grow up with any brothers, this is sometimes shocking. But as, she's raised boys and seen this play out, I think she's come around a little bit on it.
Yep. My wife is the youngest of 4 daughters, and she had the exact same thing happen where she'll just come to me like, okay, I don't get our son. Like, why is he doing this? Like, oh no, that's just normal. That's just what they do. Yeah. I was just the other day, I was with a group of people, and there's some young people, and there's this young boy, and he starts telling, it was my son, tells a story about how when he was younger, he like jumped through monkey bars and slammed his head shut, didn't make it through his head, and he has this mark still and stuff like that. And we're all laughing. But there was this, one of the college students who was there, she said, "You did what?" And she was like, she couldn't understand it. And I said, "Let me guess. You have no brothers, do you?" She's like, "No, I don't have any brothers." I'm like, okay, you won't understand this then, why he did this. It was, of course, one of these things where it's like, I think I can jump through that. And he hurt himself, but like, it wasn't like the mom naturally, and this is what she should do, automatically in the situation goes to comfort and to make sure that he's okay. That's what mom should do. Which is
exactly what I want my wife to do.
Exactly. But the dad, as long as he sees it's not like some emergency, says, "Buck up. You're fine. Just rub it.
Put some spit on it." Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be fine. Yeah. And that's what the man should do. And that's essentially what priests should do. They should be telling people, buck up, put some spit on it. Just be a man about it. And because they're not, men are not attracted to that. Because men are actually attracted to that. In fact, I remember when my son, when we moved and we first were going to a Latin Mass parish, it was an FSSP parish for the first time. My son had recently received First Communion. He had no interest in serving at our old parish, which had boys and girls there. As soon as we got there, all of a sudden, he was just locked into those boys up there because their militaristic nature, everything about it. He was just mesmerized by it. And he started serving pretty soon after that himself. And it just was something, I didn't say anything. I didn't say when we were at the old parish, you shouldn't serve or anything like that, or you should serve. And I didn't say it to new one. I hadn't even brought up the topic yet. But he all of a sudden was interested once we started going to Latin Mass parish, because he saw these men, being young men, being militaristic, the discipline necessary. And it was interesting because once we started going to practice there, the guy who ran it, he expected a lot out of him. And he didn't. And if you missed a practice, you weren't serving the next month. If you were late, you weren't serving. And at the parish I'm in now, it's the same rule. If you have to be there at 9:15, if you show up at 9:16, don't bother. Just you can't serve. And I think that's a good thing. And yeah, sometimes you're late for legitimate reasons, but the whole parish shouldn't be revolving around your life and your problems. And so I think those are all things that give a different ethos to a parish, and so they don't turn away the young men.
Yeah. And when the priest is like that and has a discipline and a rigor, and I think rigor here is a good word, not a bad word. When he has a rigor like that, it also allows for other men to come into the leadership orbit of the parish.
Right.
And this, I think, strengthens the priest and makes the priest more healthy, because when he's weak and he doesn't ever stand up for himself and he allows the mommy matriarchs to take over the parish, no red-blooded man is going to come up and join, the covey of women, Susans of the parish,
right.
and go to tea with them afterwards and learn about all the mechanics of their group. But when the priest does have a rigor and a discipline, like you said, you show up at 9:16, you're not serving. I need you guys to be dependable. When he's like that, then that creates a space for some lay male leadership, which is what a parish needs. You need some men who are backing up the priest, praying for the priest, fasting, being leaders, discipling other men. You really do need that. And at our parish, I've seen that. It's a Fraternity of St. Peter Latin Mass parish. And I think part of that has to do with the priests having, a developed human masculinity where they're not just a pushover guy who listens to what the biggest grandma donor says, but they're a father.
Right.
They're a patriarch.
Yeah, because men aren't going to want to join in when they know the priest doesn't have their back, when he's just going to give in to anything the elderly women say and just have no backbone. Then he's not attracted to that. He's probably going to go get more involved in sports or something like that, which are good things in moderation in the right context. But what you see is actually, I think that's why you see, for example, sports are just, I'm a big sports fan, I admit it. But I also think sports in our country are way overdone, how much we celebritize it and how much we make it such a big deal. But I think it's because it's an outlet for men that they need, because they're not getting it in the parish. They're not getting it in a lot of areas. They're being told in so many areas you can't be masculine. And it's actually starting to become less so, but it's one of the few outlets for men. And the reason I say it's less so is because they're trying to emasculate a lot of sports as well. But it's like men are going to be attracted. They're going to try to find ways to have legitimate outlets for their masculinity. And it's just not the parish. So in my article, I talk about some things I think a parish can do. Do you want to go kind of?
Yeah, I like your list. Let's go through it.
Right. So I have 7 things, and of course there's more. And the first one, I decided, let's start off with the most controversial one first, which is institute AdOrientem worship. Now,
yes,
as we know,
this. I love it.
Yes, I am. And I am. I do think it's a big deal. Now, of course, you and I both go to traditional Latin Mass. We both support that. We both think that's the ideal. But we also know the reality is most parishes are celebrating Novus Ordo, and that's just what it is. We want to reach every Catholic. We're not just want to reach certain Catholics. But I really believe AdOrientem worship, and just make sure everybody understands, where the priest is facing towards the altar, towards God, and leading the people, facing the same direction as the people, leading the people in worship, rather than turned around versus populum where he's facing the people. I think AdOrientem is a major factor in a lot of the problems we see in parishes and a lot of the ethos, because when a priest faces the people, even a good priest subconsciously feels the need to entertain the congregation. He feels like now he's the focal point because he has become the focal point by facing towards them. And so that naturally leads to a lot of problems where now in a lot of cases, we're having this big group hug together. Hey, let's all get together and have this nice group hug together. Let's have a chat together. Not a priest who is saying, we are entering into the Holy of Holies to worship the Almighty Lord who is above all creation. And we are going to him and begging for his mercy, asking for forgiveness, and I will lead you there because I am a sinner with you.
Yeah.
And so I will lead you there. And I really think that
it communicates leadership.
It does. It communicates this leadership, and so you automatically see the priest as the leader, as the masculine leader. And I really think, and I've said this for a long time, even before I was going to traditional Latin Mass, I've said, if there was only one thing I could change in a parish, it would be that. It would be make it AdOrientem worship. Yeah, there's a lot of other things I'd love to change. But if you said there's only one thing you can change, it would be that, because I really think it would send so many subtle signals that a lot of other stuff would change. I think you would all of a sudden, I think a year after AdOrientem started, you'd be having people asking for altar rails. You'd be asking, more people would be receiving on the tongue, kneeling and things like that. And the felt banners would start coming down. And I really do think a lot would happen just by that one change. And I do think it's something that would attract men, because men would see this natural leadership of the priest. And so he wouldn't walk in and have wouldn't get such an emasculating vibe. So that'd be the number one thing I would say. And that's why I put it first. I also do recognize it's the hardest one to change, because even though technically any priest can celebrate AdOrientem whenever he wants to, and in fact, the regulations on the Novus Ordo assume he's celebrating it AdOrientem. That being said, we all know the actual reality is if a priest all of a sudden celebrated Mass, Novus Ordo Mass one Sunday at his parish AdOrientem, there would be explosions from some people's heads, and they would immediately go to the bishop. And in the vast majority of cases, the bishop would say, you got to stop that, or else I'm sending you out to the boondocks to be the chaplain at this hospital where nobody actually goes. And so I get that, but doesn't mean we should not say that is a factor. If you don't recognize that it's a factor, then you can't solve it. And I really think that should be something that priests, if they feel like they're in a situation where they can do it, they should do it. And lay people should be asking their priest, hey, could we at least maybe the 7:30 Sunday morning Mass, could that be AdOrientem? I mean, baby steps. We're going in a certain direction. Ask for that. I mean, obviously ask for a Latin Mass if you can, but if you feel like that's not even going to happen for whatever reason, ask, hey, could you maybe celebrate the Mass AdOrientem? And a lot of parishes aren't even physically set up that well for that anymore, but usually it's not a problem that you can make it happen. So that'd be the number one thing I would say. If nothing else, if you did that, I think you would start attracting young men.
Well, it by facing the people, it introduces an emotive element. Think about it this way. If I'm not looking at the camera, I'm turning around. It'd be kind of weird if I did it right now, but it's just Dominus vobiscum, right? But if I'm now looking at the camera and I see, well, it doesn't even work with the camera, because if I could see, like, there's 814 people. If somehow I could see all 814 of you right now, I'm going to have to be a little bit like, the Lord be with you. I'm going to have to put a little bit of a little twinkle in my eye and a little curl up of my lips to be happy. And I'm probably going to put my hands out a little bit more, because guess what? I'm on a stage now. Right. And I don't want to be looking like, the Lord be with you.
In fact, you'll get complaints from parishioners.
So I've got to work on my altar persona. And this is so lame. I can't stand it. Guy comes out there and he's like, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Father. Everyone says that, Today is the fourth Sunday of Ordinary Time, and we're going to learn about, the loaves and the fishes and how we can share in our own community to build each other's faith up. Let's go ahead and begin our liturgy, and then the Lord be with you and with your spirit.
I'm emasculated just hearing you say that.
I'm emasculating myself right now.
I know. It but it's so. But here's the thing: is if you hear that week after week, you don't realize that. That's
You
why a
don't
lot of
hear it.
the
You bring a
yeah,
19-year-old young man in there, and he hears this, and he's like, "What is this?"
right. And that's why I got a lot of pushback from this article from what I call like kind of the youth ministry complex,
Mm-hmm.
the whole parish complex that people who work there, I'm not even saying anything against them because I think a lot like the youth ministers, I think a lot of them do the best they can in the situation. But I do think they don't recognize a lot of the things that are assumed anymore. And I think something like the priest facing the people, it's assumed now. And it's led to, like you said, father cracking jokes and saying, welcome and greetings and all these
Even
things.
if he doesn't crack a joke, let's say
Right.
this is okay, we've got a fresh out of seminary. He's been ordained, or maybe he's been ordained 2 years. He's a Thomist and he likes traditional liturgy, maybe even likes the Latin Mass, but he can't do it because he's a parochial vicar at, St. John's Church under this, weird Monsignor, right? And so he's doing his best to celebrate the Novus Ordo devoutly. But like you said, he can't say it AdOrientem. Even the priest who is doing everything he can to say a reverent liturgy still has to cultivate an altar persona.
Right.
And that's bad.
Yeah, it is.
And he's got a mic, which is so dumb. It's like Garth Brooks, Madonna or something. And unfortunately, he has to have an altar persona. And what's great about the Latin Mass is sometimes if I'm getting in there, it's a daily, or I'm late a little bit, I don't see the priest walk out there. I don't even know who the priest is on the altar. Unless it's like a really tall priest or a really heavy priest or something. I don't even know who it is until he turns around, or a bald spot,
right.
Which is great because he's in persona Christi. The reason he's wearing vestments, by the way, is to disguise himself. So we don't see Monsignor Chuck. We see Christ. So I don't know if I could change one thing. You said AdOrientem. I don't know if it'd be AdOrientem or communion on the hand. I do think your observation that AdOrientem would begin to change more things. It would have a cascading effect. I think you're right on that. But communion in the hand just sends so many bad signals as well. So
it is. Yeah, it's terrible.
It'd be hard for
my
me to
hope would
choose.
be AdOrientem would lead to. Yeah, it is. And of course, Bishop Schneider talks a lot about communion in the hand, how terrible it is, and he's absolutely right. But anyway, so AdOrientem. Okay, the second thing also involves being at the altar, and that is only men and boys are at the altar. There's a lot of times people don't understand the differences in what things are called the sanctuary versus the nave and all that stuff. But when I say sanctuary, I'm talking about what's at the altar.
When anyone says sanctuary, that's what it means.
That's what it means, but I know that's not how it's used, unfortunately. That's what it means, is the sanctuary is where up at the altar. Now, of course, in a lot of modern parishes, it's very hard to distinguish where the sanctuary begins because of just the way it's designed. But in traditional parishes, of course, it's very obvious. But most of them still have some type of elevation, except for when they're a bowl, but there's some way that it does it. But only men should be there. And what I mean by that is obviously the priests and then altar servers. And even if you have a situation, Novus Ordo, where you have readers, I would say men, only men readers. Men, if you have extraordinary, I don't think extraordinary ministers should ever be used because there's never an extraordinary case for it. But if they are, they should be men.
Well, if the priest is dead and we're Antichrist persecution and I'm in prison and the only way I'm getting the Eucharist before I'm martyred is if Eric Sammons brings it to me, I'm okay with that.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Y'all heard it here that I would allow an extraordinary minister in certain cases. That would be one of the cases.
Right, exactly. So, but the idea though is men up there. Now, immediately people think, okay, what are you saying there? Like, why would women being up there turn off men? And here's where I think this is a truth that has been rejected today, but I think is very true. It's a truism. That is, men and women will both follow men leaders. Women, however, will follow women leaders, but men will not typically. And so when you have men leaders up there, it doesn't turn away the women because they will follow men. But when you have women leaders up there, it does turn off the men. I don't care if you like it or not, that is just the reality. And so therefore, having women up there does turn off men, but only having men won't turn off women. Now, obviously, these are generalizations and there's exceptions. There's going to be men who are very effeminate who that won't be true for, and women who will not follow men because they're super feminists and stuff like that. But we're talking about normal people here. And normal people, that's true. And so that's why I think having women up there does turn off men. And we're trying to attract that 30-year-old man with 2 kids who has some level of faith, but not really been well formed, doesn't have that great amount. And if he sees all of a sudden it's time for communion and 42 elderly women come up and get their Purell and clean off their hands,
pump it up,
and they're all and chatting with each other while they're doing it, even though mass is going on.
Oh yeah, pumping for each other.
Right, exactly. I'm sorry, but the message is very clear. Young men, go away.
Yeah,
you're not really welcome here. And so I think that there should only be men or boys. Obviously, altar boys would also.
And by the way, Eric, tradition's on your side. 2 popes have said women may not serve at the altar. Boom, done. Now, I know John Paul II allowed it. Major mistake, John Paul II.
It was a mistake. Yeah, it just was a mistake. And so if we really want to bring in youth, attract the young men, this is another thing to do. And again, this is one of those things that's very difficult for a parish to do that has had altar girls and female Eucharistic ministers. Do baby steps. And I do think, I know of parishes that have instituted boys only for altar boys. They didn't touch the extraordinary ministers at all, but they just went to altar boys. And yeah, sure, they get the initial complaints. But ultimately, it just
you will get some complaints.
Yeah, it'll just eventually it just happens, and you accept it.
Eric, I've even heard now you got women who say, we've had it for so long now. There are now women out there who said, well, I was a girl altar server, and I want my daughter. We've had it now that long.
They're using the traditionalist argument.
Yes, they're using tradition. Yeah.
So, and another difficult one, but if we're serious about young people staying in the church, then we have to be serious about how do we make it so young men will stay in the church. And so these are things we have to look at. If we refuse out of hand to look at things like AdOrientem or men at the altar, then I don't think you're really serious about keeping people in the church, in my opinion. So that's the second thing. A third one is maintain silence before and after Mass in the church. Don't make it chatty Cathy hour where you walk in and people are just chatting away about this and that. And it's unbelievable how often this happens. And why is that important, particularly for young men? I think, and it's important for everybody, but I think young men, it shows the seriousness of where you are. Right. This is not the coffee shop. This is not even the baseball game where you're chatting with your buddies during it. This is something different. And all of these things, actually, all my ideas, they're meant to show when you walk, as soon as you walk in, something's different here. This isn't like other things. And your connection to the military is a good one. What would happen if a couple recruits are hanging out in line before things getting started, they're at attention, and they start chatting with each other? What does their commanding officer do to them? Oh, yeah. I don't even want to know.
You get even in I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. We line up before and after, and there's other times when we line up by rank. You don't chat during that time. You would get balled out if you did that. And right. In the kids class, which is before our class, I see that happening. Kids are starting to chat when they're lined up, and the professor is on those guys. Hey, we don't talk like that. We don't talk during this time. Because there's something serious about this.
Right. It's serious. You're preparing for something serious. If people are just in there chatting, then the reality that Jesus Christ himself will come down, body, blood, soul, and divinity, that miracle will occur in less than an hour probably, that is lost. Because you walk in, it's no different than you walked into Starbucks. Yep. And so this is another signal. Now this is something I don't think should be that hard to implement. I mean, if the priest has any backbone at all, just tell everybody, start making announcements. It'll take some time for people to get used to it, but just start making announcements and make it, make sure it's known. Have somebody go up 15 minutes before Mass and just say, just so we know, no talking, please. before Mass or after Mass. Just make it very clear. And then, so I don't think this one's actually very hard, but I think it's an important one because it shows the solemnity of what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So okay, so number 4. So we've had.
May I add something here, Eric? I'd like to
Yeah,
add something.
Yeah.
It's been said, someone pointed this out, and after I reflected on it, I think it's true. That is, men, women like to get together and they talk. It's bonding. They get in groups. They talk about their children, their husbands, their health, their parents, all these things, their communities. But it was noted by someone that for men, the greatest bonding moments between father, son, best friends, brothers-in-law, whatever, usually happen, get this, sitting side by side in silence, not facing one another and not talking. Examples of this are driving, fishing on a boat, where you're both just sitting here fishing, hunting quietly in a stand, right? I don't know, there's probably other examples as well, but this also shows that, marching in the military, standing in formation, these are what create some of the deepest bonds, because what it shows is, and it might go back to something primordial, I don't know, that in order for human society to survive, men have to work together to achieve a common task. Take down the elk, right? And that usually requires a more quiet thing, an intense attention towards something, and you're not focused on one another, you're focused on some task, whether it's marching into war, fishing, hunting, whatever. And that it's those experiences that men have together that are focused not on one another, but on some other third thing that creates a deeper friendship. If you understand that, what you're saying about being in church, not having AdOrientem face to face, but all towards something else in quiet, and then you bring in the interior sacrifice, suddenly you have what that study was articulating. Right. You now have a liturgical moment like that. That's surprise. That's the old evangelization.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how when you look at the church, how it's done things over the years, it just fits with human nature because nobody knows human nature more than the church.
Yeah.
And so things are developed like that. I actually put in my article, I said, men would prefer following a leader into battle to sitting around a table for a chat.
True.
And it's similar to what you're saying, that we do things together side by side. That is the bonding moments. And in silence, that's that's fascinating. And it's not surprising at all because, I mean, if you're a parent with boys and girls, you know the difference right there. I mean, the things I do with my son, I have one son and 6 daughters. The way I interact with my son is far different than how I interact with my girls. And because, when you were talking, I was thinking about the things that I've bonded with my son on. It's those things. It's activities in which we're doing them together side by side.
And the surprising thing is, talking is part of it, but it's not the key element.
Right. It's definitely not key. Okay. So yes. So institute AdOrientem, ensure there are only men and boys at the altar, maintain silence before and after Mass. The fourth one is sing traditional hymns, not the 1970s folk drivel so popular today. I do not understand why parishes still sing these songs from the 70s when they're not even good modern songs. I mean, I don't want them singing most of this modern stuff either, but it's like at least, make something slightly attractive to some people. Right. And so, but the traditional,
if you're going to do show tunes, at least.
Right? Yeah, get some good ones.
Pump it up. But y'all heard of Hamilton? Get some Hamilton in there. I mean,
and so
Phantom of the Opera.
So it's like, I mean, there was a little mini debate of whether or not it's appropriate to have some of these modern Christian songs, and a common person popular today in Catholic circles is Matt Maher. And I like Matt Maher music. I listen to it. I enjoy it.
Sure.
And I know some people don't like that type of music. That's fine. But I like it at home, listening to it, background music. I enjoy it, not for Mass. But that's really not the problem. If parishes were doing Matt Maher music at Mass, that would be a huge improvement over what we have now, actually. Because what we have now is, like I said, the Marty Hagen stuff from the 70s, and which is just very effeminate. But when you think about these traditional hymns, which usually have lyrics that are often warlike, they have just the music itself is just so much more uplifting. I think that's another thing that would attract young men, and it's not going to turn off women. They're going to love it too. But this kind of drivel we have now does turn off the men particularly. And again, we're talking about all these external things that help people to see the internal, to see what's going on behind the scenes, underneath everything.
Yeah. What do you think about pipe organ?
I like pipe organ.
I like it.
Yeah, I think it's good. Yeah. I mean, I think there's lots of. I think there's the Eastern music I love as well. Liturgical music I love as well. I mean, the whole thing is sung. The whole liturgy is sung in the East. But I just feel like you go to and you hear sacred music, traditional Western sacred music. I mean, that just automatically uplifts your soul and makes you think of greater things. So that's another thing. Fifth one out of 7 is institute men's groups like the Holy Name Society that focus on concrete, practical activities. And this totally ties into what you were saying about how men bond through these shared activities side by side.
Right.
So what we do now is we have men's groups that sit around and share their feelings about Bible passages. That's a very effeminate model. That's not, and you and I, we've been huge on the importance of reading the Bible. So obviously I'm not denigrating the idea of reading the Bible. But when you sit around and say, what does this passage mean to you? Through a bunch of guys, most of the guys are heading for the door.
They're like, I don't care.
Right. What I want to hear, what you want is.
What I want is, what do the church fathers say about this passage?
Right. If you have a Bible study group, you want it to be what the church father says. When I was living in Maryland, I had a group of dads. We'd get together and we would read a doctor of the church. So we'd pick a doctor of the church and one else would pick a writing of that doctor. So St. Athanasius or St. Aquinas, whatever. And we'd all read it. And then we'd get together and we'd talk about what did that father say. But it wasn't just like this chat of just like, what do you feel about this? We would look at, say, what has been said about this and things like that. And that's okay, but I'm talking more than that is men's groups that do things, service projects. They work at the soup kitchen. They go to Planned Parenthood once a month and they pray in front of it. They build a grotto on the church grounds.
There we
go.
They're
doing these
grotto.
Yeah, they do these things that allow them to bond together as men in shared activities. They're not sharing feelings with each other. They're saying, "Hey, pass me that shovel, because I need to get started on this."
Hey, I got a project. Everybody out there, all men, get a group together and build an altar rail.
There you go. It's all
measure the church, build it, and then surprise Father with it. Surprise! Altar rail for Easter. We made it ourselves. You have to put it in. That's what everybody watching right now should do. You're
not going to offend us by not putting it in, are you, Father?
Yeah, we worked hard on this. Look at the craftsmanship. Hand carved. That's what guys should do. You should build a grotto at your church for Our Lady and covertly build the most magnificent altar rail and then gift it to Father at Easter. Say it has to go in. We've already got the installers right here ready for it.
That's a great idea. So, but the idea though is we have men's groups that do these activities because like you said, that's how the men come together. And that's what's going to be attractive to that 30-year-old young father when he says, when you give him the option of, oh, do you want to sit around and share your feelings about this Bible passage? Or you say, oh, do you want to help us build this grotto to Our Lady that's going to be beautiful in the back of the parish grounds? I'm sorry, but most men, they're much more interested in the grotto than sharing their feelings about something. So that's another thing I think we can do, these practical men's groups. And, some Knights of Columbus are hit and miss in my experience. Some are not good at all. I mean, they just aren't good.
I think Knights of Columbus have become weak sauce.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad.
It's really sad. A great institution, but.
Right. And so I think the Knights can be a force for good, but too often they're not. But I know Holy Name Societies, the old days, do processions. I mean, we in Cincinnati, where I live, every year in October, close to the Feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, we do a men's procession through downtown Cincinnati, a Eucharistic procession. And we pray the Rosary, but we actually have a Eucharist procession. Father, processes with the Eucharist. And we have hundreds of men in downtown Cincinnati, and it's only men. So we're singing, Holy God, we praise thy name. And let me tell you, people are coming out and saying, what the heck is going on? And they're seeing this, and it's just something that is very striking. And so when you bring your young boys to that, that's just a great thing to do. So that's the type of thing, a Holy Name Society, that's who does it in our city. Those type of things. Organize a men's procession. Those type of things. Again, side by side.
And get your priest involved, but if unfortunately your priest won't do a procession, now you can't do a Eucharistic procession without a priest, but you can do a Marian procession without a priest. There's a great tradition in Spain of all these processions that don't necessarily require clergy. So it's possible. You can do these things.
So institute men's groups that do these practical, concrete things. Another one is 6 is call for sacrifice. Now here's mostly going to be father from the pulpit. And we talked about this already briefly before. The idea that if your homily each week is be nice, you're turning off all of the men and most of the women, but you're turning off the men particularly.
Honestly, the older I get and the longer I'm married, the more I'm, around women, I think a lot of this applies to women as well. I think happily married, normal women who are married to good, decent men and have a number of children and have some sons, all this kind of stuff ticks them off too.
Right.
My wife would roll her eyes and be frustrated with everything we're listing. Yeah,
my wife the same way. And I think it's like I was saying before, that women are not turned off by masculine leadership, but men are turned off by effeminate leadership. And so a call for sacrifice is really needed, where you're telling Lent's coming up. You tell the congregation, listen, don't just give up, creaming your coffee and that's it, or maybe chocolates or something like that. Yeah. No, do real sacrifice.
Real fasting.
Learn about, if you're a priest, learn about real fasting, intermittent fasting, and how it's possible, and learn the details of that, and then teach your congregation to do real fasting. Teach them real things to give up and ways they can sacrifice, particularly how the men can sacrifice, for their families, and things they can do, how they can be an example of that. None of this just, this Lent, kind of give up, try to give up something, and that's all that's said. No, give practical. Men need practical.
No, the worst one is this, Eric. Don't just worry about giving up something.
Oh my gosh.
Take on something. Compliment people, these kind of things. Right. Plant a tree.
Right. And it's like, lame. It's not that you shouldn't take on things, but the focus is giving things up in Lent. That's what we're focused on, is the things you give up, because we've become attached to them and they prevent us from doing other things. That's why that needs to be a focus. Right. Speaking of a homily I heard, I was visiting a parish about a month or so ago, and it was Novus Ordo, and the reading was the Colossians or Ephesians, where Paul says, wives, submit to your husbands, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, children, obey your parents. And the priest literally started by saying, well, when it comes to what wives should do, I'm not going to touch that one. We talk about that one at home. But men, you should be, love your, and he talked about what the men and the children should do. And I was like, oh my gosh, man up. That's
cucky.
It is. I mean, it's like, come on. And so I just feel like when that happens, you're turning off all the red-blooded men. It's not that we want to hear you say, Father, women, you need to, do every single thing your man says, and you need to be like barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen and like on your knees every time he walks the door. That's not what the point.
What it does say is, I want everyone here to know that there's a privileged, untouchable class.
Yes.
And it's the women.
And
that's what it's saying.
And frankly, what it also says is we don't have to listen to that passage from Holy Scripture, which is inspired by God. And
because he put there's it in a privileged feminist class here at the church.
Right. Yeah. So there is a truth in that, wives submit to your husbands. And what the priest's duty should be is to explain what that means in our modern culture. What does it mean for a wife to submit to their husband? But when you punt on that, you've emasculated yourself and the congregation. So call for sacrifice, like sacrifices to the women to submit to the husbands, like the sacrifice of the husband, that you have to love your wife like Christ loves the church, and look what he did for the church. So those things we need to hear, and that's going to attract men as well. And then finally, the last one is just tell it like it is, I put it. Stop mincing words. When things come up in culture, don't avoid it because you're afraid of offending somebody. So when you talk about abortion, speak strongly about it. Or the one I always think of is contraception. You never ever hear about contraception. You still with me?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just saying,
Okay.
you just said the C
Oh,
word.
Yeah.
On YouTube.
Think about how often, if you go to a typical parish, how often you've ever heard contraception ever brought up from the pulpit. I mean, it's brought up less than hell is brought up.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is people using contraception can end up going to hell. And so we need to talk about both those things. We need to tell it like it is. We need to talk about hell. We need to talk about the evil contraception and the evil homosexuality.
And how about just, like you said, how about we talk about don't be in debt? Don't look at pornography. I mean, the things that are destroying our families, debt, pornography, premarital sex, adultery, fornication, drugs. These things all need to be called out from the pulpit regularly. You'll hear people, well, my people aren't ready for that. Your people are ready for it. Right. They're watching Netflix.
You're just not ready to talk about it.
They are getting bombarded every 24 hours on all of these things. And you're like, well, my people aren't ready for it. I need to build them up over the next year. And then maybe I'll preach a sermon on this topic. Wrong.
Right. They need to hear it. And I think the problem is that we're terrified of offending people. Terrified. I've worked in parish level evangelization, diocesan level, and that is the underlying current is what if we do this, will we offend anybody? And if we do, that means we can't do it. But something like if I'm a priest and I say from the pulpit that debt, you need to do everything you can to get out of debt. There are going to be a lot of people in the congregation who are in over their heads in debt.
Yep.
Some of them might be offended and might leave. Yes.
Yep. There's already people on the live chat who have kind of expressed that kind of thing. They're offended that I said that. Or are you saying I'm a bad person because I have debt? No, I'm not necessarily saying that. I am saying you're entered into slavery because of this debt, and we need to figure a way out. People don't like me saying that. I don't care. It's for their good.
It is, because what will happen is if you don't ever talk about things like that, well, then nobody gets built up. People leave anyway. If you do talk about it, what will happen is, yes, a few people will be offended. They might stop going, but they were already probably on the fence anyway, and they probably will have left in a year or two anyway. But there will be the people where the seed is planted on the good soil. They're horribly in debt. Maybe they had issues that they couldn't control in the past, or maybe they weren't brought up well on that issue, whatever. And they say, I'm going to do something about it. Well, that's the whole point. I mean, you got that guy to now do something about it. Yeah. And the same thing with contraception. Maybe they just never even knew because they never heard that contraception is always in every case evil. And so they're contracepting and they don't even realize it. Yes, there will be the people who contracept who are offended, and they might complain to the bishop about father, and they might leave or whatever. But you will get a few people who it impacts them. Maybe not even at that moment, but it plants that seed, and eventually they turn away. And that's the whole point. Then they go to confession. Then they are in a state of grace again. And so I think all these things, the reason that we are not attractive to young men as a church is because we're so afraid of offending people. We're not calling people to go beyond themselves. And that's what men want. They want to be called to something higher than themselves and something greater than themselves. Men will sacrifice, and women will too, of course, but men will want to sacrifice for a greater good. They want to sacrifice for their wives, for their family. They want to sacrifice for the church. They want to sacrifice for their country. They want to do these things. If you say, hey, we need men to come out 8 a.m. on Saturday morning to pray at the Planned Parenthood. We need men there. Don't buy this stupid lie that some pro-lifers try to say, like, oh, it's most important to have women out front and stuff like that. No, we need men leading there and at the abortion clinic saying, we love these babies and we will sacrifice. We'll get up early on our day off and we will go out there even if it's raining and we will sacrifice. That's what we need to call men to. And yeah, a lot of them won't respond. We live in a culture that diminishes a lot of stuff. But you got to call the few. I mean, I'd rather have a Gideon's army that's willing to do these things than just a bunch of flabby people. And we're all flabby. You and I are flabby too. We're working on it. We're all working on it. But we're trying to not be flabby anymore. And so that's I think how we're going to get the young men and then the young people.
Yeah. What about, you said tell it like it is. What about tell it like it is not only in the sermon, but in the confessional? I've spoken to so many men who have said, yeah, I went to confession and I confessed pornography, or they said I confessed masturbation, some of these kind of sins. And the priest says, oh, that's not a sin, or don't worry about it, or it's just a sexual sin. It's more important, to be humble and, work on your wrath or your anger, sins of the flesh are minor. This, again, every guy knows this is total BS.
Right.
When a priest tells him this in the confessional.
First of all, it means the priest probably himself is struggling with it, or not even struggling with it, giving up to it.
He's already made an excuse for himself. Why not share that excuse with everybody?
And it's just the idea of, again, of worrying about offending somebody. You got to tell it like it is. And yes, there might be some root sin that is causing you then to go to pornography or something like that. And yeah, priests can address that. But it has to be very clear. Every single instance of viewing pornography or masturbating or using artificial contraception, every single instance is a grave matter, and therefore potentially a mortal sin, and should be avoided at all costs. And if you ever do any of them, you need to find confession as soon as possible. Don't go to communion, and find a confessional. And if the priest is saying it's not that big a deal, you need to find another confessor, frankly, because that man is not helping you. And that priest is going to face a terrible judgment when he dies for that, because he has such a great responsibility. So yeah, tell it like it is from the pulpit, in confessional. Now you'll do it differently. Like I heard it was an FSSP priest who said this one time. He's like, I want to be a lion from a pulpit and a lamb in the confessional.
Yes. And
that's a beautiful way to put it. So how you say it in the confessional, when you talk about pornography to a man individually, that's going to be very different than how priests would say it, of course, from the pulpit. Because there's the point of the confessional is this mercy and encouraging them to continue the fight. And so, but you can't say it's not that big a deal. No. But I also think just in conversations, and this is where lay people come in too, after Mass, you're all hanging out at the hall, and are you telling it like it is? I don't want everybody to be jerks or anything like that, but are you masculine talking about things? And if somebody brings up, for example, something, maybe a movie that they like that is really not appropriate for Catholics to watch, you can say, no, I'm not going to watch that movie. It has these pornographic scenes in it. Yeah. And just say it like it is. And maybe people think you're a little odd or something like that, but it kind of shows that we are trying to hold ourselves to a different standard, and we respect women. So we're not going to view pornography. So so tell it like it is in all situations. But definitely in the confessional, you got to say it's a grave matter, and you can't do it, and you do everything, and help them to figure out ways to stop, because obviously now we're talking about addictions and psychological issues and things like that, but you can't undercut it by just saying it's not that big a deal.
Yeah. And when the priest gives you a penance, we must do the penance. And I always recommend everybody listening, this is not divine law, this is just Taylor Marshall's opinion advice. If the priest gives you 5 Hail Marys, my opinion is you should pray the 5 Hail Marys for your penance, and then whatever the priest gave you, you double it and offer it for him as a priest.
Oh, wow. That's a great idea.
So if a priest says, for your penance, I want you to say a decade of the rosary, focusing on the descent of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, I will go into the pew. I'll pray that decade for my penance, and then I will pray that same decade right then for that priest. I think this is a great way for us to just, that way you always have a way. And I'm thankful that priest was in the box. He might be thirsty. Right. He might be tired. He was there for my sins to be washed away. The least I can do is to volley back that penance for him. But you can also, this is an old Catholic thing to do, you can also impose more penance on you.
Right.
You can say, I'm so thankful to be forgiven. I'm going to also just spend an extra 15 minutes before I leave, before the Blessed Sacrament.
Right. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And obviously the ideal is you have a spiritual director who can talk to you frankly, and you run every penance, everything you do by him to make sure.
Well, I don't know if you have to run every penance. If you just say,
well, that's a good way to put it.
I'm not going to, today I feel really bad that I committed that sin. I'm not going to put salt on my food. I don't think you have to call up Father and be like, hey, I'm thinking about no salt in the food. I think those kind of things. But if you're going to do some rigorous fasting, something that is extraordinary, you definitely should always run it through a spiritual director. But when it comes to just the minor penances that we put on ourselves, I think those kind of things are all right. An all-night vigil, probably run that by your spiritual director.
Anything extraordinary, definitely, I think, because that he will know you best. And obviously, when we talk about fasting and things like that, there's health situations, diabetes, things like that, where obviously
work, if you're a laborer,
Yeah. So
obviously, if sitting at a desk all day is easier to fast than it is to, bring in the harvest.
Right. Although I will say, I remember years ago, there was a basketball player, Hakeem Olajuwon, who was Muslim, practicing Muslim. And for the month of Ramadan, he would fast during the daylight hours, like they're called to. And he was playing NBA basketball at the same time.
Boom.
And I was like, wow. And the more I've learned about fasting and the physical aspects of it, the more I've realized it actually is very possible to fast. Yeah. You have to know how to do it, and you have to work up to it and all those things. But you can do a pretty physical job actually and still have pretty long fast, and it works. In fact, you can get more energy from fasting. So, but those are things you check out with medical professionals, not Taylor and Eric.
Yeah, there are guys that run whole marathons in a fasted state now.
Right. Right.
And there's a science to it. And again, it's not just you just go and try that. You have to work up to it in training. But we're learning a lot more about the human body and the metabolism, and
it matches with what the church has always said things to do. I mean all things work like that.
The church was fasting historically Wednesdays and Fridays all year. The vigils of all the great feasts, so like the day before the Immaculate Conception, the day before Christmas, a hard Lent, a penitential Advent, a mini Lent before the Assumption. I mean, St. Francis was doing basically 4 Lents a year.
And monks always were OMAD, 1 meal a day.
Yeah.
And I read a great book by a modern monk who just rediscovered OMAD, 1 meal a day, in like the 90s or something like that. And he decided to do it, and he realized how great it was. And he also, doing his research, found that that's what all monks did until about the 1700s. Mm-hmm. And it just was, and they could do all this stuff. I mean, it wasn't like the monks of the 1400s weren't sitting around all day. They were out in the fields supporting themselves, but they're eating 1 meal a day. So again, what the church discovers these things, science eventually catches up to and finds out. But these are the type of things that I think if we call men to, call men to actually fast. No, and by the way, your pet peeve, you said what your pet peeve was. My pet peeve was fasting doesn't have to mean food, but why not? I mean, fasting first and foremost is food.
Go read the Bible. Fasting has to do with not eating food.
I mean, yeah, and it's just unbelievable that they want to go away from food. Why? Because in our, especially American culture, we eat all day long.
We are slaves to food in America. We watch TV shows of people making food.
We take pictures of food.
There are shows about making cupcakes. People watch a show on making cupcakes. I mean, we are slaves, people.
Right. I mean, things like debt, like the food, all these things are how you become slaves. And if we want to attract men, we want to call them to these various things, like get out of debt. Don't be a slave to food. If you're eating all day and you're eating your potato chips all day and stuff like that, it's just, you're a slave, and you're not being, that's not a masculine way to live, frankly. And it's hard because I will admit it was later in my life that I started seeing some of this stuff and how important it is for things like fasting. Unfortunately, my dad taught me about debt from day one. So I've been, always know that was important. Thank you, Dad. But anyway, so I think all these things all tie into ways that we call men particularly, and then the men will be the leaders who bring their families. Another one point I want to make that I didn't make. This is the biblical model. The biblical model is God selects one man, and he is the mediator through which salvation then comes. You see that with Abraham. You see that with Moses. You see that with David. And of course, we see it most of all with Jesus Christ. We see it with Peter, the Pope. All this is the biblical model, that to bring salvation to a group of people, you don't go to the whole group. You go to one person, the mediator, and the father is the natural mediator of the family.
That's right.
And so if we want to reach families, if we want to reach families, you reach the father, and then the father will reach out to the family, to his wife and to his kids. That is the biblical order of things. And so what we're saying here isn't some radical, crazy, rad trad talk. This is simply the way the Bible has presented it to us from the beginning, and how God works. And so I think all I'm asking is, hey, let's go back to the Bible. I'll sound like my old Protestant self and say, let's go back the way they did it and do the same way. Hey, even Jesus, he picked 12.
I was about to say, Holy Family.
Yeah, the Holy Family. But Jesus himself, look at him though. He picked 12 men. He didn't pick the whole world and say, okay, well, I'm going to reach all you. He said, I'm going to have these mediators that'll reach everybody. The Holy Family. He was subject to his foster father and his mother. Mm-hmm. All these things are huge signs to us that we need to be focused on fathers, and by doing so, it will have the trickle down effect, so to speak, of everybody.
Yeah, and if someone's listening, like, well, you guys, you're saying all these things with guys. What about women and all that? Look, what we're calling for here is for a more radical understanding of what it means to be a priest, a man, a father, a husband. We want all, for women watching right now, we want all of your husbands never to look at porn again, right, to fast.
Amen.
To be strong, to be resolute, to get your family out of debt, to have extra income, to not be afraid to have another child because there's debt piling up. Little extra money to buy you a dress or new shoes for the kids or a new Christmas outfit or whatever these things are. That's what we're saying here. And we want your husband to be fasting and praying for you and for the children, and him to be the one catechizing the children at night, him being the one saying, all right, let's pray the rosary, him being the one saying, everybody get in the van, we're going to mass, find the shoes. That's what we're saying. And the only way that we can get that way as a church is if we make, for example, the 7 recommendations that Eric was making today. Those are a great place to start.
Amen. Yeah, and that's the whole point is when you focus on the men, the women and children will follow. That's the natural order of things. It does not leave out the women. It does not leave out the kids or anything like that. It actually brings them along in the proper way, because what's happened is when we focused on the youth, they've all fallen away. When we focused on just the women, people have fallen away. We want everybody to come in, and the way to do that is by focusing on the fathers.
Yeah. Before we go, this has been a great show. We mentioned at the beginning the Eastern Orthodox have a higher retention rate of men.
Correct.
We note, of course, that the Eastern Orthodox have kept their more rigorous fasting terms.
Yes.
And they have kept their ancient liturgies.
Yes.
And I think this testifies to everything you said and what we've said before about living a traditional Catholic life. We've talked about, the Latin Mass 101 we've done together, a video here on YouTube. We did a video on reasons why to attend the Latin Mass. And I think our experience as dads of 7 and 8 children, we realize that all these things go together.
Yes.
Right. It's not isolated. We have to create a culture, and it is liturgical. It is priestly. It is paternal. It has to do with fasting. It has to do with the calendar, all of these things. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. I think we just need to go back to the old ways, like your book, The Old Evangelization.
Right. Absolutely. And I think anybody who thinks such a activity, such a direction is anti-woman, I think doesn't really understand women.
They don't get it.
Ultimately, they really don't, even if there's a woman saying that. But yes, go back to the old, because the fact is we evangelized the world through that method, and we brought in whole cultures, whole countries. Millions of people were brought to the faith through this. Through an Isaac Jogues coming over to America, and that's how we did it. And I think that's how we have to do it again. And if you look also historically, many countries, the missionaries, who did they go to first? They went to the king.
That's right.
Because it was the biblical model that you go to the leader and then it flows from that. You see that over and over again, that they go to the king or whoever the tribal leader is, whatever the situation is, that's who they want to get, because they know if they get him, they get everybody. Vladimir, of course, with Russia. Yeah. Get him, the whole
Clovis
country. Yes. I mean, you got so many different cases. So that's what we're saying here on a familial model, that you go for the king of the household, the father, and then the whole kingdom, the family.
You see that in the Acts of the Apostles.
Yes.
Fathers convert, and then the whole house gets baptized.
Right. And that's what, So it's a proven model of success. We don't have to, we try to find all these new models like, oh, we're going to try this and we're going to have these studies that show whether it work. Well, just look at history. You read history. This is the proven model the church has always used with success. So let's just use that. The old evangelization, let's just go back to that.
And just to throw in here, what was Satan's model?
He went to
target the woman.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the divine model that we see in the Old Testament and the New Testament is target the man.
There's actually a beautiful part about that with Adam and Eve is if you read the passages there, Adam is there.
Yeah, he's present.
He's present.
He's
and
a
that's
deadbeat.
an
He's
important
deadbeat
point.
husband.
He's a deadbeat husband. He's not doing his job of protecting and leading the woman. And that is the inversion of nature that causes the fall. And we're trying to repeat it now. We're trying to repeat that, allowing the dad to just be a deadbeat, just kind of stand on the side while the mom does everything.
And expect the mom to fight the dragon.
Right. And we're saying, there's a dragon, go take her
Dad
on.
watches football, watches porn. Mom fights the dragon. Yeah, that's going to work. Yeah. Not.
Hasn't worked since the beginning.
No, never worked. Never worked.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, great. All right. Well, Eric, you're always great. The shows with you are always awesome. Thank you so much. If y'all haven't seen the previous ones, he and I have done some really good ones on the Latin Mass and fatherhood and things like that. Just go on to my YouTube channel, Dr. Taylor Marshall, and just search Eric Sammons or Latin Mass, and you'll see those. You can follow Eric at Twitter. Eric R. Sammons is his Twitter handle. It's just like I have to put the middle in one of mine too. Mine's Taylor R. Marshall because we couldn't get the one. So it's Eric R. Sammons, and then also ericsammons.com without the R, right?
That's correct. Just ericsammons.com.
Yeah. And then check out his book, The Old Evangelization. We touched on a lot of those principles today in this video. And of course, if you like this video, please hit the like button. It's very important that you do that while you're watching. Every time you're watching one of my channels, or Eric's. Eric, what's the name of your YouTube channel?
Well, my channel has been dormant, taken down, so I might come back with some stuff.
Okay.
So for right now.
All right. Well, anytime you're watching and you like these videos, please hit the like. That really, really helps us out a lot. It tells YouTube it's a good video, and then it kind of starts showing it to other people. That's helpful. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. If you're on a mobile device, turn notifications on for YouTube. That way you'll get notified every time we go live. I try to go live, as you've noticed, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 Central. Monday, Wednesday. If news comes out, sometimes I jump on, or sometimes things move, but I try to keep it steady Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But please do subscribe, and you'll be notified, especially if anything goes at a different time. Of course, you can always listen to this audio only on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, anywhere podcasts are distributed. And I appreciate everyone's help on Patreon. If you'd like me to sign some books and send them to you, you can do that at patreon.com/Dr. Taylor Marshall. Just signed a bunch of books this week, and they went out. And of course, as we always say, pray the rosary. If you're not praying the rosary, you're not on the team. Especially if you're a man, you need to pray the rosary. This is your weapon. Pray the rosary for your family. I did something new in the last since Christmas, Eric, and that is I have 8 kids, myself and my wife. That makes 10 of us. So I distributed the 10 of us over the joyful mysteries and the glorious mysteries.
Nice.
So every person in our family, in my mind, has a perpetual mystery. So, for example, my wife, I assigned to the finding of Christ in the temple, because my wife's always worried about the kids. Where are the kids? She always wants to find them in God's house in heaven. So I was like, okay, that's a good one for joy,
Yeah.
So, and then my youngest one, I did presentation in the temple, because it always reminds me she's the youngest. So I put all of us on a mystery. And so now when I'm praying the joyful and the glorious mysteries, kind of felt wrong to put them on the sorrowful mysteries.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe
like at the pillar. If
a child is really struggling, you move them into the sorrowfuls,
Yeah, right.
But that way, whenever I'm praying those mysteries, I'm offering a whole decade always. There might be other intentions, but that decade in my mind is reserved. So
That's
all of us in our family are getting regularly hit up on the rosary. So I might encourage y'all to try that as well. Assign your family members to a decade, and then the rest of your life, you can remember them on that decade. So pray the rosary every day. It's really key. It's the Bible on beads. It's the gospel on beads. We all need it. And so let's close up. We'll close up with the Hail Mary, Ave Maria in Latin. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et ad hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right, Eric Sammons. Everybody go check him out. ericsammons.com. Get the book, The Old Evangelization. And we'll see y'all in shows to come. Godspeed. Bye.